Hello and welcome to Sunset TV. You're watching Viewpoint with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. Well, Israel and Iran continued to exchange missile strikes, ignoring international appeals for a ceasefire. Israel launched the offensive with a surprise strike on Friday, killing top Iranian military commanders and damaging nuclear facilities. Iran has vowed to open the gates of hell in retaliation. Iran has also reportedly threatened to target the US, the UK and French military bases and ships in the region if they attempted to block Iranian strikes on Israel. Both countries have promised further retaliation, and the situation could likely escalate even further. In this edition of Viewpoint, we will analyze the Iran-Israel conflict and what it means for the region and the world. Joining me on the program today are Ambassador Dileep Sinha, career diplomat, and Professor Harshvi Pant, Vice President, Foreign Policy Observer Research Foundation. Thank you to my guests for joining me on this edition of Viewpoint. Ambassador, let me start the program with you first. Let's first try and understand and analyze the sudden escalation. Of course, the rhetoric has been going on for a really long time. But did you expect this to happen? Did you think that this was on expected lines where it actually turned into a conflict as well, from moving on from rhetoric?
Frank, as you said, this has been going on, the rhetoric has been going on for at least 15 years on a fairly serious scale. So when one says that one did not expect it, one would be very naive to say that. And yet the very fact that it's been going on for 15 years meant that you had kind of got used to the extreme rhetoric coming from both sides. Now, in this particular case, as you would recall, President Trump had given Iran 60 days to come to terms on a nuclear deal. And on day 59 comes the report of the IAEA that Iran is not complying with its obligations under the agreement. And then on day 61, which is one day after the deadline given by President Trump, Israel attacks. So one can say one should have been prepared for it, one should have expected it. And yet the ferocity of the attack from Israel and then the response from Iran has come as a bit of a surprise, I would say, because given the fact that it has been going on for the last 15 years at least, this sudden escalation, I'm sure, would have come as a surprise to many people.
Professor Harshvi Pant, let me bring you into the picture as well. The sudden quick escalation that we are talking about, it doesn't seem to be dissipating at the moment, and it looks like both the parties are in for the long haul. What's likely to happen?
Hi, Frank. I think, Frank, what we are seeing is a conflict that started with certain assumptions, but now I think increasingly will be framed according to the battleground realities for both sides. As you were discussing earlier, the rivalry, the animosity between the two sides had been almost decades old, but the situation on the ground, both in Israel and in the region as it evolved over the last few months, had been quite extraordinary in both in scale and scope. And I think one of the things that perhaps led Israel to take the decisions that it took to escalate it at this level was perhaps the fact that militarily Israel seems to have a control over Iranian proxies unlike any time in recent history. So the fact that Hamas and Hezbollah had been, to a certain extent, to a great extent, been neutralized by Israel in the last few months, perhaps allowed Israel to think that militarily, this is the moment to strike before Iran moves even further with its nuclear program. And now, if you look at the conflict, there is also a sense that perhaps Israel underestimated Iran's ability to come back. Like now what we are witnessing, Iran is really coming back despite the top military leadership being decapitated by Israel. We are seeing the kind of barrage of attacks that Israel is witnessing. Perhaps there was a degree of underestimation that once we take the first step, Iran would not be able to strike Israel the way it is now striking. And that now I think will dictate what happens in the future, because for Netanyahu, it would be quite catastrophic if the nuclear program gets accelerated after this conflict in Iran. And for Iranians and the Iranian leadership, it's a catch-22 situation. If you don't retaliate, then what happens to your domestic legitimacy? But if you retaliate, how far can you retaliate? Do you have the capabilities to retaliate for a long haul? So I think both sides have to make these battlefield calculations before they come to any sort of a concluding agreement or any ceasefire on the battlefield.
Okay, points very well taken. Let's build on these points that have just been made, Ambassador, and I'd like to point you in one particular direction. A lot of reporting in the media which suggests that Israel is looking for a regime change really as far as Iran is concerned. President Trump also has thrown his weight in with regards to that particular bit of news. So what's the end game really as far as Israel is concerned, and how far can Iran really push this and try and push back like the professor was just suggesting, looking at the domestic compulsions?
Well, as the professor mentioned, Israel today has the upper hand. It is in a very strong position militarily. It has decimated Hamas, it has decimated Hezbollah, the Houthis have been neutralized. Internationally, you have Russia is busy with its own war, China is focusing on Taiwan. So in this kind of a situation, geopolitically, Iran is in a very strong position, as well as militarily, it's in a strong position Israel, vis-a-vis Iran. So in this position, it can push its advantage as far as it wants to. Now, Iran's essential strength is its ability to fire missiles. Now, Israel is very small and very vulnerable, but its defenses are very strong. But if Iran is able to penetrate its defenses and cause greater civilian casualties, then obviously Netanyahu will have to answer questions. So far, Iran has not been able to do that. The civilian casualties in Israel have been fairly limited and controlled. On the other hand, Israel has been able to attack Iran almost at will. Although people say that the nuclear facilities of Fordo and Natanz have not yet been completely destroyed. Now, to come to your question about what is Israel's game plan in this, what is Israel's goal? So far, the Israeli military has said that the aim is to destroy Iran's nuclear capability, not regime change.
Yes.
Although in one of his speeches, Netanyahu did say, kind of almost an appeal to the people of Iran, saying this is your chance to stand up to your regime that's been exploiting you for the last 50 years. So clearly regime change is at the back of the mind of Netanyahu, but that may not be the target given to the military to achieve immediately. There is another report that President Obama had dissuaded Netanyahu in 2012 from attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. And there's another report now saying that President Trump has prevented Netanyahu from killing or trying to kill the Supreme Leader.
Yeah.
But they have just killed the IRGC chief. So Iran clearly has a distinct advantage militarily. Now, destroying the nuclear facilities in Fordo and Natanz, according to most experts, is not within the capability of Israel. They'll require the deep bombs of the cave-busting bombs that only the Americans have. And there is no indication at the moment that America is prepared to intervene and complete the task that has been begun by Israel.
Absolutely. All right, Professor, let me bring you into the picture once again. Let's look at it from a positive angle and a positive perspective. What could be the best, case scenario for both Israel and Iran to walk away from this?
I think, for Israel, certainly, as you have been discussing, it would be useful to see an Iran that is much weaker, that is, perhaps with its nuclear capability disappearing, and if you go further, perhaps some kind of a regime change. Even if it may not happen anytime soon. So broadly, for Israel, this is a moment to emerge as the undisputed leader, hegemon in the region, and I think that is also one of the reasons why we have seen some concerns being expressed in the Arab world about what is happening, because clearly there is a sense that the balance of power is moving in one particular direction, and Israel is emerging as militarily a formidable adversary. Now, for I think for Iran, certainly for the for the regime there, if they can survive at the that would be a great achievement. Now, Frank, we have not seen any other example anywhere in the world where airstrikes have actually led to a regime change. So I do think that while Mr. Netanyahu might be tom-tomming this ability to see to reach out to the Iranians, there is actually no love lost in the Iranian street for Israel as well. So let us also recognize that fact, and I think Mr. Netanyahu would also recognize the fact that Israelis are not particularly liked by the Iranians in general. They may hate their regime, but it's not as if they are going to rally around Israelis' proclamations of downing the regime itself. So, and in most cases, what we have seen in the past is whenever you have these kind of bombing campaigns, they lead to a rally around the flag effect. They lead to a strengthening of the regime. They lead to greater support for the regime. And I think, therefore, there is a possibility that the Iranian regime may also view this as a sign that some of the more brutal elements of that regime's characteristics might be given a pass by the Iranians themselves, who have been chafing under this regime for a while and who do not particularly like the regime. But now that Israelis have attacked the regime, they may rally around. The regime itself. So I think, in some ways, for the Iranian regime, it might be the survival is at stake, because they are in a difficult situation. They have to retaliate. They do not have the capabilities. They know that militarily Israelis have an upper hand. So I think for Iran, for the Iranian government, this is a moment of reckoning in ways that perhaps they have not faced in a long time. And for Israel, of course, the question is, what is at the end of it, what do they gain? What's the strategic objective? And it's all very well to demonstrate your military might, but military might to what effect? Ultimately, what is it that you are trying to achieve? If you're simply trying to achieve the decapitation, if you're simply trying to achieve the dismantling of the nuclear capability, will you be able to achieve with that? Or in retrospect, you might see an acceleration of the nuclear drive by the Iranians. If they really now genuinely believe that, look around the world, you have North Koreans on the one hand, and you have the Libyans and the Iraqis on the other, where the regimes were taken off because they did not have weapons of mass destruction, whereas the North Koreans are being negotiated with because they do have some kind of capability. So I think the lessons that will be learned by the Iranians also will lead to what happens on the ground, and whether you see a permanent dismantling of the nuclear infrastructure, or will you see a temporary halt and then an acceleration once the conflict subsides.
Absolutely. Okay, let's broaden the scope of the discussion now, Ambassador, and let's also talk about what all of this means really for a region that has been in turmoil for quite some time as well. If you look at the Middle East or West Asia or whatever you want to call it, what does all of this mean?
Well, for the region has been in turmoil, as you say, in various permutations and combinations. We have had the Iran-Iraq war. We have had wars of Israel with its neighbors. Most recently, we had the war that Israel has with Gaza and the Gaza Strip, and then the war in Lebanon, where the Hezbollah was taken on, then some attacks on Syria as well. So Israel has been on the offensive in the region. Then also there was the earlier tension that was there between the Arab countries, especially Saudi Arabia and Iran, which 2 years ago China mediated a kind of a peace between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which enabled at least one old rivalry to be capped, so to say. But right now the whole thing has started unraveling, because the Arab countries have been very strong in their criticism of Israel's attack on Iran, even though the Arabs would not really mind Iran's nuclear capabilities being capped, or at least controlled in some way, if not decapitated. The other issue is the price of oil, because Iran is a major producer of oil. There is also the fear that if Iran gets angry and blocks the Hormuz Straits, then prices of oil will rise even further, although they was already started rising. Then there is the fear of China intervening. There are already some reports which Pakistan has denied, that Pakistan has been sending missiles to Iran. Yes. There are reports that China might be supplying weapons to Iran. Now, if that happens, then you have the current polarization that has already taken place in the world between the East and the West. That might actually break out into another war apart from the war already going on in Ukraine. So that would really be dangerous for the region, because you would have the old war, the Cold War syndrome of the East-West confrontation coming to our region.
Absolutely. Just building on this, Professor, I'd like to bring you in as well. Are we going to see a realignment of allies, friends, foes, etc., with regards to what's happening between Israel and Iran? How do you see the West really reacting to all of this? What is the equation going to be like with the Arab world?
See, I think we will certainly see some kind of a realignment, but I think that realignment is also predicated on a lot of other theaters that are evolving. So, for example, what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. Now Russians certainly can feel a bit relieved that now there's a bigger war raging somewhere, and which takes the pressure off them. But I think it is also true that Russians recently have declared a comprehensive strategic partnership with Iran, and they have not been able to do much about Iran. So I think there is also this question of Russia's inability, despite proclamations of being able to stand up for their allies in the region. And I think that is something that we have been now witnessing from Syria to Iran, a pattern that Russians say a lot, they proclaim a larger role in the region, but their ability, because of their own war and because of the sanctions that have been imposed on them, their inability to stand up for their allies is becoming quite visible in the Middle East. So I do think that realignment would mean that for all the pressures that we have been witnessing around the American presence in the region, there is a lot of talk about American credibility under Trump, whether America will stand up with its allies and partners. I think what Trump has done certainly is to reestablish America as an important partner once again. He was there in the Gulf recently, visiting major countries. He was there to send a clear message that America will stand with its allies in the region. And now what is happening is certainly his steadfast support to Israel, despite some confusing messages about what America may or may not do. There's a clear underlining of his message that, look, Iran has to come to the negotiating table. If it doesn't come to the negotiating table, America can ratchet up the pressure. So he's, openly siding with Israel in this. So certainly I think that in some ways would reassure the allies, but also would put them under pressure, the Arab states, as I had mentioned earlier, because they feel that perhaps the balance of power is tilting too much in favor of Israel. So I do think that in some ways, realignment is beginning to happen. It's interesting that China has simply come out with a statement saying that we want restraint from both sides. They have not been able to, impact the realities on the ground much. Once again, I think it tells us that despite all the problems in America, despite all the challenges that America is facing, America retains remarkable leverage in the region. America remains one of the key players and powers in the region, and the way America will tilt will also define, in some ways, the balance of power in the Middle East. Though despite Mr. Trump sending some very confusing messages in the beginning, where he seems to be suggesting to Netanyahu to stop, and Netanyahu was moving ahead, I think by and large the American-Israeli alliance remains intact, very strong, and perhaps the key driver of politics in the Middle East. One of the reasons why Israel feels so reassured in doing all that it is doing in the region, because it feels that American presence in the region gives it a net security, in ways that no other country in the region can expect America to provide. So I do think that American centrality in the Middle East gets established, and Trump's role in shaping the post-conflict scenario is also quite visible, because as we have heard, I think just today in the last few hours, the Iranians have also said that, look, perhaps if Trump wants them to the negotiating table, Trump first has to condemn Israeli strikes. This is very low bar that Iranians are setting for Mr. Trump, but I think that's also recognition of the realities on the ground.
Absolutely. All right. Ambassador, let's look at this from an India perspective and what all of this really means for India, and how should we be dealing with this situation?
It's a very difficult situation for India because we have Israel, which has been a strong supporter of India. In fact, it was one of the countries that came out very strongly in support of our Operation Sindoor, and specifically said that India has the right to defend itself against any terror attack. It was perhaps the only country that came out so openly and clearly so strongly in support of us. On the other hand, Iran also has been generally very correct in its behavior in the recent past. It condemned the Pahalgam attack, and then on Operation Sindoor, it took the line that almost many other countries took, which is that there should be de-escalation, there should be diplomatic solution to the problems, and it offered to help. So one can't fault Iran for the kind of stand that it took on Operation Sindoor. So given this situation, we really have to tread very carefully. With Iran, we have close relations. We have had traditional relations with Iran. We have had difficulties in the past, but in the recent past, as I said, Iran's behavior has been absolutely correct. And there is no reason for us to antagonize Iran. On the other hand, Israel's support to India is extremely strong, and we value that support both diplomatically as well as militarily. So in this situation, I think our stand that has been taken is that appeal to both sides to not to escalate the matter, to get down to talks. That is perhaps the best position to take, and to offer support in the process. In fact, some other people have also mentioned that India is in a very good position to intervene in a dispute like this, where almost every other country has a prejudiced position in terms of supporting one side or the other. So there are very few countries that can actually mediate, although I don't think India will go to the extent of saying that we are prepared to mediate. But in our statement, if you see that we have offered support, which effectively means that if these two countries want, then India would be prepared to help and get to a solution, because any nuclearization of this region is not in our interest. As it is, it's a very volatile region. And on top of that, if we have a situation where as it is, Pakistan has had to close its border in Balochistan with Iran because of the problems. So it's very close to us. And also the fact that a lot of our oil supplies come through the Hormuz Straits. That means that our economy is heavily dependent upon the region, and we must ensure that there is peace and stability in this region. So in this position, our stand that we try and encourage both sides to come to terms and get back to talks would be the kind of position that we should take, and we have been taking.
Absolutely. Professor, your thoughts on India as well, because let's not forget, India is not directly involved, but has a lot of stake in the region. We are very close to the region as well, and we are a big stakeholder at the end of the day. So do you see India playing a bigger role, maybe not that of a mediator, but, with the country not having any ulterior motives, probably persuade both the nations to take a step back?
I think India's stand is certainly going to be important in shaping what happens after the conflict. I think in some ways, the conflict and its immediate contours will be defined by both sides depending on how they feel about the political objectives and battlefield realities. But by and large, I think India's relations with both sides, as the ambassador was articulating, have been quite robust. But the fundamental issue, I think, is which India perhaps need to think about, how do you galvanize global support for that, is that proliferation in India's backyard, nuclear proliferation in India's backyard, is something that across party lines, successive Indian governments have repeatedly said is not in Indian interest. And therefore, how do you prevent nuclear proliferation in the region, whether what Israel has done today will accelerate the process of nuclear proliferation? I think that is going to be a central, most important question for Indian security. If India can do something about it, if India can galvanize regional support, it would be very important. And as you mentioned, India has enormous stakes in the Middle East. India has terrific relationships with all three power centers, whether it's Israel, whether it's Iran, or whether it's the Arab states in the Gulf. And I think we have to be able to continue to pursue these relationships independently of each other. And this conflict, irrespective of what happens in this conflict, India's stakes will only continue to grow as India's economy grows. And one hopes that an early de-escalation perhaps allows not only India's equities to flourish, but also India's relationships to continue to move in the positive direction that they were moving before this conflict escalated.
Okay, time to get quick closing comments now from both my panelists with what next and the best way forward. Starting first with you, Ambassador.
Well, I think what we need to impress upon Israel is that it is easy to start a war, but a country must also show sagacity in knowing when to stop. That is very important. Israel has not been able to do this. So while our support to Israel should be strong, and it should also be a bit of counseling advice saying that you need to know when to stop. And the example that we set in Operation Sindoor, where despite being in the stronger position, we decided to accept Pakistan's request for a ceasefire. We could have gone on, but we did not. And that is what is important in any kind of conflict situation, to know when to stop. And that is the kind of advice we should be giving to Israel and perhaps to the other countries, to Iran as well.
Absolutely. And Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think what Ambassador Sinha said is very important. I think for Israel is a great friend of India, but ultimately what we have seen a country like Israel stuck in what seems to be a never-ending conflict in the region. And that's not a good place to be in. That's not something that benefits either Israelis or the region broadly. And I think it also does not help in some ways India-Israel relationship. Because if Israel is stuck in these conflicts, then it allows for limited possibilities to emerge for India-Israel partnership as well. So I do think that this idea that we need to impress upon Israel that conflicts have to have some kind of a termination, some kind of a political objective of the use of force, and therefore if one can work with Israel and Iran towards building some kind of a consensus, I think that would be a good place to be in.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Much appreciate your views here on Viewpoint. Well, with that, it's a wrap. But before we go, let me just give you my quick concluding remarks. We are likely to see some kind of realignment really as far as the global order as well as regional forces with regards to what's happening between Israel and Iran. Israel clearly has the upper hand, but it has to learn how to stop while it is ahead and be the bigger person. And also, Iran is not going to give up easily. Iran is going to fight hard because there are several domestic compulsions that need to be taken into consideration as well. That's it from me. See you again next time.